Hey Joel, how's it going?
Hey man, good to see you.
Good to see you as well. That whole thing was really fake because we were just talking right before this. But it's fun to be like, oh,
I
Joel,
haven't seen
I
you
didn't
in
see you there.
ages.
Yeah. Everybody, thank you for joining us. My name is Mark Abrams. I'm the content manager over at Puremix. And I am joined by the one and only Joel Hamilton.
Hi
So,
everybody.
Joel was obviously the mixer on the Highly Suspect video that we just released at the end of last year and then subsequently had the mixing contest for. So today we are here doing a Q&A and a wrap up on that contest as well. So a lot of people anxiously awaiting to see who won. We had some crazy prizes, tons of mixes turned in, and a ton of questions submitted for you for this Q&A too. So
Great man.
it's going to be fun.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
excited to get into the questions.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Well, let's why don't we do the mixing contest wrap up and then we'll dive right in.
Cool.
Cool. All right. So, first of all, to start things off here, um, we want to thank our sponsor, which was Eventide. They
hmm
put some crazy, awesome prizes up for us. First prize is the anthology bundle. That's everything that they make, which is pretty amazing suite of plugins. Second prize is the Elevate Mastering bundle, and third prize is the Black Hole, which I love. That thing is great.
hmm
So, yeah, tons of really good
That's
stuff.
a good one. I got to do presets for the black hole. I love that one.
Oh, nice. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's great.
yeah.
You have quite a few pieces of Eventide gear back there too, right?
Yeah,
Like
I mean including
harmonizers and
the H9000, wherever that is, somewhere over there in the
yeah,
effects side of the rack. But and I'm loving that thing. It's deep, like it takes a minute to get used to the interface because there's kind of the remote. Like I have the one without the screen, and the remote actually lives on the same computer that you're running Pro Tools or whatever on. And there is a plugin that'll do the same thing, so you can do sort of recall within a Pro Tools session for an outboard piece of gear.
oh, that's
um,
cool. Nice.
it's killer. It's killer, and it runs all of the algorithms that you would expect, like everything from an H3000 down to the H9 stuff.
Yeah,
It also has like a Dante card. It's really, really deep. And it takes a minute to get used to the interface because there's so much flexibility available. But once you get it, it's incredible. It's
yeah,
really an incredible box, and it sounds great. To be able to run like a 2016 Verb right next to a bunch of algorithms that are from an H9, but on returning it to a console for me
right.
is amazing. Is amazing. It's in one box. It's
Wow.
it's really killer.
Yeah, very cool.
Yeah,
Nice.
man.
I'm gonna have to check that thing out. The I believe that there's a plugin, right, of like just in that anthology bundle. There's
I'm
one of them
not
that's
sure. I
super
think what
deep,
it
but
is the algorithms that live on the H9000, because the H9000 is more like a platform that those algorithms run on.
yeah,
And I'd be surprised if they had like hardware modeling of a thing that'd be like a hardware model of a laptop.
right.
You
Yeah,
know what I mean?
yeah.
Like a plug-in of a laptop would be weird.
It's getting Inception. All
Yeah.
right. Well, cool. We'll start off by announcing our third place winner here,
Cool.
and that is I still don't have a drum roll for these. I really need one.
Mm.
Our third place winner, we've seen him before, is I call him Clown, KLWN. So
hmm
congratulations, you're gonna win the Black Hole plugin. So good job, Clown. Um, do you when you were kind of going through the mixes, were there some things that were kind of standing out to you at all?
Yeah, I mean, with the top three in particular, it's like the thing that kept getting me was the fact that there were informed moves made, but that kind of had the fundamentals held down at the same time, rather than like losing the entire story just for the sake of doing something unique. But
Right.
there were still moves made within parameters that seemed to work.
Right.
And that was the cool thing. And so the once it was narrowed down to the top contenders, that was kind of the common thing, was that I wanted to hear something where it's like this imparts something of the mixer. There's some fire blown into it by whoever was putting the mix up, but at the same time, it just didn't lose the entire in production and compositional intention,
Right.
you know.
Right.
And I felt like these top three definitely, like, they hit that. They could read the compositional intent. I mean, granted, you have an example of the one that already came out, but these were tweaked in a way that was refreshing and didn't
Right.
lose the script altogether, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. That that word intention, I think, has come up on every single one of these Q&As that we've done with everybody.
Or
It's such a key thought. So definitely have to get back to that in
well,
a little bit.
especially compositional intent when you're acting as a mix engineer, being able to
Mm-hmm.
read it is the same thing as sort of walking into a room and everybody's playing in a particular key, and then you just like blast out some note that's outside that key. It's
Yeah.
going to sound quote wrong. Like, and how do you get right or wrong? It's you get right or wrong based on context and intention.
Right.
So the
Right.
minute you make a move in a mix, it means that you've been reading compositional and production based intent, and then you're extending that. You're like taking that ball and running with it in the direction everybody had in mind.
Right. Yeah. Great answer. That's awesome. Okay, and I think that we have a question about that that's coming in a little bit. That was a pre-submitted one, so
Okay,
definitely have
cool.
to. That's yeah, great outlook on that. Okay,
So
so
what you're
let's
saying
see.
is don't talk so much until we get there.
No, that's yeah, that was a really
You're
great
like, okay,
synopsis of that
dude.
whole concept. So cool. Okay, our second place winner is MIIK or M2K, or it could be Milk. But congratulations, you won the Elevate Mastering Bundle. Good job. And we'll just, you want to jump to our first place winner?
That would be great. That would be great.
Okay. All right, cool. So our first place winner is Samuel D. Congratulations, Samuel. You won the entire anthology bundle.
That's actually
So
kind
very
of a
cool.
sick bundle.
That's a really good bundle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That one, for me, the reason that one was number one was because it was the only one that I heard that really moved into the chorus with the right kind of transitional energy. Like, not just dynamically, meaning like it felt like this person understood what was important about the wind up and the punch, like what comes just before the chorus, the way it's set up, sort of it's like when we're mixing and we become sort of an analog computer. It's a series of if then situations that we're creating. even
Mm-hmm.
even you know, the controls on a compressor are based on if then logic. If it gets this loud, then do this. It's sort of when that
Right.
criteria is set correctly, it enables all the sort of information to pass through it in a way that feels unfettered and yet kind of supported by the plugins or boxes that you're using to deliver it.
Right.
And that was the only one where that the sort of subtlety of that approach really was reading for me in
Yeah.
this person's mix. And it was like when it moved into the chorus, it felt to me the same way I intended as a producer, because I produce it as well, where that would
Right.
flood the room rather than just get louder or brighter or whatever. It's sort of, there's something about the physicality of the way it was hitting the speakers that the number one mix got right as compared
Nice.
to every other one that I heard. And that
Right.
transition is kind of the whole trick with that song. It's
Right.
there's no other move in that track that to rely on to light it up, you
Right.
know.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Very cool. The I think that was one of my favorite things from the video too. Is you talk about and in general I've heard you talk about this, but just keeping the story going and everything supporting what's actually happening inside of the production, the song, the
Yeah.
story. Every move is made toward it and circles back
Well,
on the
just like with
tension
every
that the.
classic mix, it feels inevitable.
Mm-hmm.
And so this was the only one that sort of felt inevitable rather than manipulated for a goal. You know, it's like when you can
Totally.
hear the hand of the mixer on it in a way that doesn't support the story. It just is sort of like, what's the point of that gesture?
Right.
You know what I
Pulls
mean?
you
Like
out of the
what
song.
true, in the
Yeah.
true sense, what is the point of it? Meaning, like, why are you making that move? Because if
Mm-hmm.
you're making that move for any reason other than what supports what's being expressed by the song, it's going to feel outside the contextual parameters that we're working in.
Right. Right. That's a huge point right there. You're dropping like tons of quotes right now. Quote possibility stuff there. That's a great one. That's That's usually something that we've been doing these mix review events recently too, where Puremixes will come and they'll play their mixes for some of the mentors, and a lot of the things that kind of come up in those are usually moments of like, you did this thing that was, you know, like a hard pan from left to right, and it just like feels like a fun move when you're making it and you're making the plugins and tools do all of that. But as a listener, it just pulls you, like you're listening to the song and then this thing happens and you're like, whoa, wait, what happened? Or whatever. It's like a fly buzzing around
Yeah.
your head or something.
Well, it's because it's
Yeah.
like a cheesy movie. It's like a cheesy 3D movie from the 50s where you're just sort of applying the available technology to something outside the narrative that's being expressed. Like when you just have a rake randomly that shoves into somebody's face, but it has nothing to do with the story, really. It's
Right.
corny, just like corny, you know, anything like product placement where it's like, I'm now going to enjoy this ice cold Budweiser is in a part of the
That would be
dialogue.
crazy if somebody did that.
Yeah, you know what I mean? No, but that's a part of the narrative. The whole setup here is that we're on Puremix. So that actually doesn't move outside of it. The fact that you have a backdrop that says it, that's well within context.
Sure.
It's when we're talking about something like, I can't believe that that this person moved to Italy, and then all of a sudden you're like, yeah, that's true. I'm going to have a Budweiser now. You know what I'm saying? Like it's like so corny and shoehorned into place. And to me, that's the exact same thing. We've got a bunch of reasons to stay within the context of the production intent. It's going to go back to that 100 times. Everyone's going to be so sick of me blabbing about that.
No, that's great. It's something for me personally that in the last couple of years has just completely changed the way that I approach mixing or productions, and just making sure that everything is focused on one particular goal and supporting that. And I think it's a great thing to keep on kind of harping on there. Well, cool. So congratulations to all the winners. You guys will be hearing from us soon. We'll get those prizes over to you. So great job, everybody. And for everybody else, you'll be able to go back to the mixing contest page. We'll have those winning mixes posted. You'll be able to check those out and listen and do some comparisons so you can get a lot more out of it. One thing that we always kind of bring up during these things too is like the whole competition part of it. That's for fun. It's nice to be able to kind of gauge your work and hear feedback from the guy who actually mixed the song, which is amazing. But the entire point of the mixing contest is really just to test your skills and continue learning and apply what you saw happen in the videos. The winner thing is so that we can get some prizes into some people's hands, but it's not the main goal of it. It's really just about going through the moves and applying what you've learned and you saw Joel do, and finding ways to kind of move that in your own mixing. So great job, everybody.
But it's a really cool opportunity to have an informed critique as well. There's no great mix or track that's ever been created in a vacuum. Like it's subject to jumping through a ton of hoops, especially any major label project that you ever work on. It has to pass about it has to go over 1 million hurdles before you actually hear it on the radio. And so it's massive to actually have informed critique, even if it's from the A&R department, which you can take information from it as them sort of representing an informed version of the average listener. Like it's not a technician listening to it at that point, but you can gather information from every single aspect of that critique. And for me, this is it's a really handy, it's an amazing opportunity. Actually, if I could have done this when I was 20 and had somebody like talking about a mix that I had done and telling me why it had to change, I mean, that would be amazing to me.
Right.
That would have put me so far ahead of where I had to like bushwhack my way through the pricker bushes to get there, you know?
Yeah. Definitely. It also helps too. It's like, once you play something back, you hear critique back, you start to always kind of internalize that thing that you might have learned from the feedback too. So it just like carries on to the next.
Exactly. Well, because you start to recognize that it's about diagnostics. Like Brower's going to hear what a mix needs quicker than you probably, and be able to pursue it and then spend more time on refining those sounds rather than like spending all day looking for what it needs. And then you only got 5 minutes left to refine it. And so you wind up with this clunky version of what the mix is. It's like the same way that a doctor with a lot of experience who's seen 1 million cases of a particular thing can get to a path to better quicker.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like you can actually start being treated for the thing right away if somebody's seen it a million times before. And
Right.
it's like, even when you're getting sort of batted around by, the band or whoever, the management or whatever it is, you have to use the sort of diplomas in the doctor analogy on the wall to be able to make an informed decision about the path to better. And I mean, assessing that to me is massive. It's like if a band comes in and they're like, I've been coughing all night, I want you to take out my lungs. And I'm the doctor. I have to say that will kill you.
Right.
Like I have to use
Yeah.
experience. It's not just a service industry situation. I have to take all my experience to know that ripping out your lungs is going to end your life. But
Right.
I can suggest a bunch of paths to better very quickly because I've seen things get better because of a few key elements right off the bat, especially in looking at a mix in a way that there's going to be a few things that you prioritize because we're always subject to masking and physics. I mean, fuck, that's what it really is. We're
Right. Yeah.
subject to dealing with
Yeah.
physics here in electricity,
Right.
engaging with motors on the meter bridge.
Yeah.
Anyway, long answer to a short statement, but
No, that's amazing. Yeah, absolutely. Um, well, yeah, that's great. This is already really fun. um, let's
that's the caffeine talking.
that's a yeah, super good answer. I'm trying to decide where to start with you because there's so many different places that we could go, but I guess can we hear a little bit about how you got started?
Sure.
Yeah.
Basically, I was in kind of the like CB's punk and hardcore type of world. It was like I played in hardcore bands and everything was loud and kind of at the fringe always. I gravitated towards sort of the extremes.
Mm-hmm.
And so in the late 80s, when all we had, was the budget to go to some dude who normally recorded like Dead bootlegs or something and had no idea what to do with a band that sounded like Bad Brains or whatever, or what we hoped sounded like Bad Brains.
Yeah.
It's like I started to recognize that I'd be better off knowing what I was pursuing and then not knowing the tools that well to pursue it. But at least I started with the vision and then was like, had to fill in the blanks of how to get there, like what knob to turn to actually get to where I was trying to go. And it's what gave me this whole kind of career path in the sense that I realized pretty quickly that I couldn't put a piece of artist tape on my steering wheel that said home. I had to like, everything was going to be relative to what we had managed to track that day. So there was no proactive move in mixing, that it was reactive. So anyway, I started off just going, okay, I'm going to jump on the console with like, at this guy's place with a 16 track 1-inch machine and, some little console and pursue what I knew we were supposed to sound like. And it was hell. It was like the worst thing ever. But that kicked it off as far as then going home. My dad was in a band, so there were drums in the basement. There was like every element in the basement that I needed to be able to kind of put together my own stuff. And all of a sudden, one of the friends showed up with a 4-track. And as soon as I could figure out like how to record hey on channel 1 and not erase it when I recorded what on track 2, it was like I was off and running. And so cassette 4-track was sort of my life for years and years and years.
Yeah.
And basically it was like, from there I became the one in the band with a multi-track machine. That was it. And I never went to recording school. I never did anything like that. I went to school for marine biology.
Cool.
The whole time I was working on music projects with whatever I had at the time, but it shaped the way I went about things. Like if I didn't have an 808, but I had a butter knife on the edge of the table and a contact mic, then I could tune that sound to be the 808 in key with the song I was working on, or whatever. That sort of thing sort of led to, like I said, when we were talking before this started, it led to having sort of enthusiastic incompetence when I came in the room and was just ready to fail on your behalf. And basically kept at it. I mean, and I've been failing my way up the ladder for years and years and years now, like being willing to come in and try it the wrong way and then learn why the wrong way was the hard way around the block. Like where I took the long way around and gathered the information from that path and then finally started to learn how to get into these diagnostics that I was talking about, Brower being able to identify quickly, you know, and the
Right.
guys that I looked up to for years.
Yeah. Yeah. And you as well. Yeah. Um, well, yeah, neat. Quick little thing to throw in here, just kind of back to that topic of being able to get feedback on your mixes and everything, like you're saying. We launched a thing on the site recently called Mix Tank,
Hmm?
and it's a really really cool tool. It's basically it's a commenting system for mixes. So if you need to get some feedback on your mixes, or if you're working on something you're stuck, you can post it up for the community to kind of provide feedback for it. And
Cool.
we have some people that are on the Puremix team that go in and comment on mixes, and it's the same guys who are helping to kind of whittle the mass amount of mixes that we have down to a
Hmm.
select bunch that we can give the mentor. So guys who submitted your mixes too, if you're looking for feedback on your highly suspect mix, head over to Mixtank and just upload the mix, and then you can get some feedback from some peers.
You know,
So yeah,
I want to say about because it's in line with what you just said, that when I was listening to these submissions, I was listening for how people read the tracks that they were presented with rather than whether it sounded like the one that came out. Like a sound
yeah,
alike isn't the goal,
right,
in my opinion. And so that was a big part yet again of hearing something that's like, it didn't just sound like it was flipped back and forth. Even if it was, it didn't just sound like they flipped back and forth a million times between the one
right,
that came out and what they were working on. It sounded like they had some intention of their own to spin into it and go, this is the vocal timbre that I'm hearing for this moment.
yeah,
And some of them were successful and some of them were not, but that's true for any of us, where
mm-hmm.
you hear it a particular way. And that people throw around the idea of commitment. I mean, it's like putting up a mix at all is commitment. Like you're going to
Mm-hmm.
influence the outcome whether you like it or not. I always reference the idea that the guy who started the New York Times was like, you know, his goal, he claimed in the mission statement, was just to hold a mirror to the events of the day in this very grand statement. And in about
Mm-hmm.
1 second, people were like, that's bullshit, because who's holding the mirror? What's it aimed at? What's the size? What's the shape? Is it clean? Is it warped? Is it distorted? You know, like any of these things, it's like your agenda is going to influence the outcome of the mix way more than like the knob you're twisting with that agenda in your brain.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was massive to hear these things and have no idea what they used to get there, but to have, again, intention read through their hands and their moves and their decisions and their vision for it, regardless of like not having like this wall behind me. I mean, I mixed it in here, and none of that shit had any ideas for me when I'm sitting there staring at the monitors in the morning, like before I've had caffeine.
Right,
And it's like, all of a sudden I was like, okay, I've got a bunch of different tools to use to pursue a particular goal. And that's what gets it to the finish line. You know, it's absolutely what gets it there.
mm-hmm.
But that it's, I think it's important to reference, just like it's not a competition, you know, as you said, that there's
Mm-hmm.
elements of it in this case just to determine like the prizes and all the fun stuff. But
Right,
the idea that I heard somewhere, like there's a loop that's way in the background, and I heard a few mixes when I just sort of listened to a bunch of them randomly where it was cranked, you know, and it was fun to hear somebody going, I'm going to hear it like this. I'm going to present it like this. And
yeah,
I feel like it missed the mark only in the sense that that's not what that song is saying, rather than that, like it's that the
mm-hmm.
mix was good or bad. It's just
Right,
that the mix didn't support what was being expressed,
right,
because the loop that I used was on purpose very sort of contrary to the idea of being human, you know. I mean, and
yeah,
without getting too deep about it or elusive about it, as a producer, I wanted something that was very sort of like grinding machinery in the background.
mm-hmm.
And the minute you pull that to the foreground, we wind up with something that sounds like it would be in a remake of Metropolis, rather than something that's about being equals and that we're all human.
Right,
You
right,
know, it doesn't support the narrative in my brain.
right,
And for me, assigning a physicality to those sounds, that's what gives you the idea of what's, quote, right or wrong. Like
yeah,
it moved wrong all of a sudden. It didn't support the moment. It didn't support what the guy's trying to say,
yeah,
because the physicality, it started walking down the street more mechanized instead of with groove and kind of this greasy sense of having to push your hips through honey to get there.
yeah,
Because honestly, it's really fucking hard to compete with like, if Dave Grohl's like spazzing out at 900 BPM after 100 pots of coffee, and we're supposed to be on the same radio station, it's really hard to be at fucking 85 BPM and generate the same amount of spastic excitement for a rock crowd.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So there better be some sense of heft to it. The obvious reference being Zeppelin-y or whatever it is, but to have some sense of energy. And that loop kind of was like a bag of rocks around its neck. So the more you pushed it up, the more it sort of like dragged down all of that inherent energy, you know, where you're pushing through something to get there.
Right.
But I think it's important to reference that the people who got it, and then the people who subsequently won, they understood that the way that the kind of white noisiness of the guitars kick in the chorus and everything, but along with that sub-synth, that's what floods the room with this kind of overwhelming excitement. Like what the physicality is like if you bust the door open and like something pours in and just fills up the entire room rather than just coming out of the speakers, you know?
Right. Amazing.
It makes it exciting and not at 9 million BPM with somebody with a goatee jumping up and down. You know what I mean?
Right. Well, one really interesting aspect about this particular song and the backstory with it, I mean, having you as the producer also doing the mix, I think that there's something important there about when you sat down to do that mix the first time. I mean, were you, the thought process in your head, I'll ask as a question, were you thinking, I'm going to make the best sounding mix of this song that I can possibly make? Or were you thinking, how do I tell the story that we were trying to tell in the studio?
Always, even when I'm acting just as a mix engineer, it's the latter of the two, because the other aspects seem to follow that. Because if it's distracting, it has to sound, quote, better. But better is defined by the context that it's operating in. That's how you can listen to a song, you know, you can listen to something and go, wow, there's not actually any low end in When the Levee Breaks, or there's not actually this or that, or like, you know, defining better and finding the value in the set of tracks that you're presented with. That's really where it's at. Because when you put something, I ask people all the time when I'm teaching is what does a snare drum sound like? And invariably there's 3 kids that go, you know, or make some kind of noise at me. And it's like, pulled out of context in like some universe where snares rule the day, you still have some bullshit idealized notion of the sound that instrument makes. Right. But in context, a snare can be perfect. It's why I rant about fucking transparency in engineering. Like, sorry, Al Schmidt, but you've never tricked me. I've never thought that the big band snuck in my fucking living room and started raging when I put on you know, Spotify. It's like, we know it's a recording. So this sort of purism notion that there's no transducers involved and I'm just going to completely experience it like I would have if I was in the room is just such bullshit. So no matter what you do, it's an impressionistic approach by its very nature. Yeah. Because it's a metaphor. We're actually creating metaphors here where it's like, it needs to be the right metaphor for the snare drum in this context, because nobody's going to get tricked that it's a fucking snare drum in their bedroom or in their headphones. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Like nobody's ever been tricked by this. And so what interests me is that, so long answer, but in the service of what's being expressed, I find that, quote, the perfect snare sound is the one that serves the song, and people stop noticing it. It's sort of like production or mix intention makes it transparent. Because recording, to me, engineering, there's no way for it to be transparent. Right. Yeah. It's almost an apologist idea that it can be transparent. Like, we're sorry we can't send Miles Davis to all your houses, so we're just going to use this shitty, dumb microphone. Sorry, we apologize that it sucks. But here you go. Here's the next best thing. Yeah. And I just don't believe that. I feel like we can spin something into that presentation that actually supports it better than live in certain ways. Right. And that feels like heresy to a certain camp. But to me, that's absolutely the way it is. Like, compare a realist to Van Gogh. Van Gogh looks like he needs glasses. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. And there was one day when my daughter and I were on our way to the airport. She was like 6 years old at the time. And I'd forgotten to bring some things for her to do on the plane. And I got her this little like 99-cent SpongeBob ruler and like art kit thing or whatever, right? And it just so happened that we had been at the museum recently, And she was about to create art on the plane, right? She's about to do some art at 6 years old. And she puts the ruler down and is like marveling at how she can make this perfectly straight line by using this 99-cent ruler. And we got talking about art, and she didn't use these terms, but she described the difference between impressionism and realism, and asked me why I liked the guys that looked like they needed glasses thicker than mine instead of the ones that looked, they made it look exactly like the bowl of fruit on the table type of thing. Mm-hmm. And I grabbed the little ruler and I made a line with it. And I said, that right there, that's worth 99 cents, just about. And then I lifted it up and I made a line as straight as I could. And I said, that's every time I cried when I was your age, when I fell off my bike. That's every single time your grandma hugged me. That's every day I've ever lived on this planet. And just because I lifted up that ruler doesn't mean that I scribbled all over the place. The intention was still there that we're drawing a straight line, but it had me in it all of a sudden. Right. And that's something that you can't get for 99 cents. And so my pursuit is always living outside of the tools that we use to achieve it. If I need a perfectly straight line, I know I can grab the 99-cent SpongeBob ruler and do it. And that's what all these fucking things are over my shoulder. Yeah. It's but beyond that, it starts with my brain, and it starts with everything I've ever experienced and why I care about the tracks that are coming out of the speakers. Without a doubt, that's the answer to that question.
Wow. That was an amazing answer to that question. Dang. Wow. Fantastic. Jeez. There's so many sound bites already, and we're 20 minutes into this thing.
We're done. We solved music.
There it is.
We figured music out. We're done. All right, everyone gets mixing.
Cool. Power down the wall behind you.
Yeah, we're done.
That's awesome. That was really great. The ruler thing just totally threw me off track, because I had another question that built onto that, but I just went right down the rabbit hole with you there.
Good.
So
I'm gonna be dragging you down all day. We're going down the rabbit hole on this one.
Okay, so let's see. We're back on the just topic of it's about the story. It's not about you're trying to make the best kick drum, the best mix, or whatever. That's something that I when you kind of think back on your career. I don't know, I definitely have moments that I can recall and say oh, when I grasped this concept, that's when I really saw a turn happen, or whatever. And I think it was when I stopped trying to make great mixes that I started liking my mixes.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I mean, that's case in point right there. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's creating a compelling narrative rather than, fucking solo buttons should be chiseled off of consoles forever. Yeah. It's it should be called verify. And then the minute that you put it in context, none of this shit exists in a vacuum. It's it seems so obvious when we say that. And then people fucking freak out for 9 hours over the kick drum snap. Relative to what? Relative to what? I've told people a million times that the hardest shit to mix for me is stuff where everything seems to be tracked really well, but with no consideration for anything else happening in the mix. Yeah. So it's the voice is great on its own in a vacuum, and it's just clear to me that they worked in solo all day long because it's inherent. If you have the drummer playing for 4 hours while you get sounds or whatever, you're working on it just like it's soloed. It's out of context. Yeah. Right. And so you can do whatever the fuck you want at that point with no intention as to how it's going to work with the bass, with anything else. And so you wind up just making some mix engineer feel bad when they're high passing the shit out of everything and going nuts to try to get it to work with the other really well tracked bass guitar or whatever that also takes up every frequency. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's It's insane to me. It's everything is attempting to be first among equals at that point.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? There's no way for things to be number one among equals. There needs to be clear priorities set in the production. Hey, I want the listener to be paying attention to this, then this, then this, then this in a linear sense. And then the rest of it supports that.
Right.
Meaning when you watch the movie, when it's fucking Star Wars, none of it happened in space. I'm sorry for any of you fans out there, but none of it happened in space. There's no Luke Skywalker, none of it. But it creates a compelling narrative with a bunch of bullshit. So it's we can make things that don't actually exist in the world and yet create a compelling band from it. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? So but that takes priorities. That means Luke Skywalker has to stand in front of the rest of the crowd for us to follow that story down, and that's sort of production intention.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and
Absolutely.
there's a bunch of supporting characters. It's almost like casting the other tracks into roles.
Yeah.
And the way that you get, and the way that you answer whether it's right or wrong is whether it seems right in that role. Like, you don't have the giant 6 foot tall biker guy playing somebody's sensitive aunt in a rom-com.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Unless it's for comedic intention, it doesn't work. We would go,
Mm-hmm.
that's wrong. And yet people will make the like 6 foot tall biker guy version of a floor tom in a song about loving your child with Norah Jones singing. We're going to hear it as wrong.
Right. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
Like, yeah, wow, you got the tom big. You did it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I gotta like tell you a story. This is kind of another one of those moments that I personally have, but with Vance Powell, amazing, like, yeah, just brilliant tracking engineer, mixer, everything. But the lesson that I learned from him was in tracking. He had two things that stuck out, and one of them was he said, when you're tracking a band or whatever, now, like, provided you have to have gear that, you know, like consoles and everything to be able to do this, but he's like, if you're moving your faders in Pro Tools at any point, if those faders are not a yardstick mix at 0, you're probably messing up. And the reason for that is obviously, like, you're making decisions on the way in that are the mix or whatever. So, you know, your preamp levels, your output levels from your console, your fader, you know, all that stuff. When you pull up a production that he's done and you put that thing at 0, you hear the production, you hear the intention of it right away. There's no like getting around it or whatever. So that was a huge thing. And then the other one was he tracked a band on a Studer 827, but he brought an 8-track head for it, and he had the drums on 2 channels for the thing, and he tracked everybody in the room live. And at that point, I was like, this is several years ago, but it was like the craziest thing to me, because it was like, well, what happens if you don't like how it sounds? He's like, you just get the band back and you re-record it.
Yeah. Well, there's also a million things you can do short of that as well, though. I mean, like, what's going to change about the drums, like, that you can't get a little on the kick or a little in the mids to bring out the thwack of the snare and things like that. I mean, I had to do that on the Pretty Lights record, where it was all live to 2-track analog. And it's like, when the band stopped, it was done. You know what I mean? Like, it was absolutely done. And then we cut that to vinyl. He brought that home, sampled the vinyl, sampled the lacquers we had cut from the reels, and then sent me stems to then mix, you know, sent me tracks to mix back out on the console to a tape machine. And it's like, but the process of generating those sort of initial sounds was absolutely live to 2-track. Same with the Frank Black stuff that I did. It was live to 2-track. And it's like, you so cool. What do you do then? It's not even an 8-track. You know what I mean? What do you do then? It's like they go back in the room. Just like if the tambourine person messed up. You know what I mean? It's sort of you become a part of it. I mean, when you were saying that, when Vance did that, it's like, I mean, he's a tightrope walker, man. I mean, that's what that is.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
He's the right guy for the job if you're doing some shit like that, though. If you want to get into it like that, call Vance for sure. I'm just going to be annoyed that you're trying to make me do something dumb like that.
Right. Yeah.
Vance will do it great. Call him.
Right. It's crazy. Do you have a similar approach when you produced this song and then you went to mix it? How did that feel, like, you know, in terms of how baked was it? How quick was that first mix? How, you know?
The first mix came together really quickly, actually. In general, I don't labor things very much. Like, as far as the mix one, I don't labor it too much. It's like, it's figuring out what the priorities are quickly and then letting those speak. It's kind of like, you know, those little toys where you like push a button at the bottom and the animal like dies, and then you let go and it goes back up to standing up straight. It's like, I'll go down the console on a mix and figure out like what makes it die and what makes it stand back up. And it's like, you find it. It's like and sometimes it's not the primary element that you would expect. It's like, okay, in this one, for me, it was sort of like the bass is consistent throughout, the vocal, and, you know, the shaker kind of tells the whole story. These 16th note divisions, but that are quiet against the sort of, you know, it's a 2-note modulation basically in this whole song, besides the bridge. And hearing those elements means that I can use the rest of the stuff to supply physicality, to
Mm-hmm.
sort of give it something that's like it wraps around you in the choruses, or it feels hectic or alive or whatever I'm looking for. But the core elements are going to be prioritized right off the bat. So when I went back and listened to sort of what I did as a mix one, it's not very different. It's
Mm-hmm.
just sort of, for me, it's like putting everything in the shot, and then I kind of pull focus the whole
Yeah.
time until it kind of gets more of a sharp presentation of the same basic uh, arrangement of things. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? If you give me more
Yeah.
time, it just means I'll go back and forth between the vocal presence and the kick snap more times, instead of just letting it go at 3 rounds of that. I'll do it 6 times and start
Mm-hmm.
to figure out that I've gotten a better sort of mid character on it, you know,
Yeah.
using things like ortones to make sure that I'm presenting enough energy in that range to make it translate, rather than that I'm using it as a limited bandwidth speaker to see that it'll translate to a phone or whatever. I always
Mm-hmm.
look at these things backwards, in the sense that a phone is an amazing representation of what we prioritize as a species, rather than as a shitty microphone with a shitty speaker. It's
Right.
like people are like, oh, well, kids just listen on their phone. It's like, well, that's because all the information that's necessary actually gets through. Like the when my dad is on the other end of the phone and says I love you, it takes about this much bandwidth for it to kick my ass.
Right.
For everything that means, and all those years that we've known each other, to come down the wires and actually hit me in the heart, it takes about that much. And that's
Yeah.
why that shitty microphone and that shitty speaker actually work. So if you're putting the right message in that range, it hits people no matter what they're playing it back on. And it's
Yeah.
never going to let a gigantic 808 shake the house coming out of your phone. But that's not, if that's not the story, then who cares? That
Right.
just adds physicality. That just adds physicality and context to the story that you're trying to tell.
Right.
It's like the mid-range carries the DNA of the mix, and then from that center, it can extend out to the top and the bottom. But the
Right.
DNA describes everything it needs to describe right in that center, you know?
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. Brian Lucy was saying as well, like when he's mastering, he's usually pretty sacred about the range that lives exactly there. Like, I think I might be wrong. Sorry if I am, Brian, but I think he said between like around 500 and 1K. He's always
Sure.
really kind of very careful about what he's doing in that area, to not,
Sure.
unravel what was done in the mix and all that. But yeah, well,
That's because in
yeah.
that range as well, it's like you wind up with a sort of idiomatic response to how much of that is being presented. Meaning, if there's a shit ton of it, it's sort of aggressive. Even
Mm-hmm.
if what's being expressed is not an aggressive thing, you can make a mix have a texture that's letting everyone know, like, wow, this is hitting the speakers. This is making the drivers engage harder. When
Mm-hmm.
you have some clacky mids like really coming at you, and that can be something that's either supporting or not supporting what's being expressed. So
Mm-hmm.
but it's really, we're so sensitive to that. I mean, we're wired, I mean, physiologically, it's like we're wired to go, that range goes straight to the lizard brain and then out. It's a
Yeah.
direct link. So like, if you think about it that way, that means if you're not prioritizing that, you're allowing people to think about what you're doing. And if you do prioritize that, it's an involuntary response to the information contained in that range. It's truly
Right.
involuntary. I mean, that's a fact of nature. The same way that we're a species that's like, you know, developed to prioritize visual input, and there's nobody left to fucking disagree with it because they all were eaten by dinosaurs. You know what I
Right.
mean? It's like the same idea. We're wired that way. So there's a ton of info that hangs on that range.
Yeah.
I mean, as a mix engineer, I would call it 500 to like 3K,
Right.
but that's just because I'm wider about it, you know, I'm
Yeah.
very conscious. Basically, what oratones are doing is what I prioritize from a production standpoint, and then I make sure to support that as a mix engineer.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Great tips. So you guys produced this track in Colombia, right?
Yeah, I brought the guys down to Bogota, which is a place I had worked a lot. And I love that city, and that studio is amazing. It's a historic room from years ago. I mean, it's basically like Electric Lady South, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing room. There's an A and a B room there, and there's an 8058 in the B room. So we were lucky enough that with the exchange rate and the budget we had available, we just got both rooms.
Hmm.
And so I was sitting in the B control room, but running, the guys were in the A live room. Because there
Oh,
was like,
cool.
there's this weird like MXP thing in A that I just was like, whatever about. So we
Uh-huh.
just wanted to leave for tracking, obviously,
Yeah. Yeah.
and booked the whole studio. And that way we had it all to ourselves in the lounge and all
Oh, that's
that.
great.
Again,
Yeah.
privileged position, but it worked out great.
Right, right. Yeah. What was the uh the decision to go to Columbia for? Was there anything like around that, or you just love that studio and
No, it was as usual, much more sort of Yoda and wizardly with me. So it was like basically, as they say, you have a lifetime to write record one, and you have 6 months to write record two.
right,
And basically, it's if you're lucky, and the label
yeah,
cares about record two at all, you don't have much
right,
time.
right,
And these guys needed to immerse, and they were starting to enjoy the success of us getting to go to the Grammys with
mm-hmm.
2 nominations on the first record and a single that had gone gold from that.
Yeah,
And it's like, so they were starting to sort of get hit from all sides, and they didn't grow up with a lot of money. And there was a bunch of reasons where it was like, okay, we need to sort of immerse in record two. And
yeah,
rather than have somebody like flip a Jeep on pills, with somebody that isn't their wife in the car at 2 a.m, or whatever, it's like, we need to
right,
get out of here and really, really think about this.
mm-hmm.
And because we looked at sort of a radius, it was like, okay, so do we go to some place way out in Vermont in a barn, or some like location studio
Mm-hmm.
like that?
Yeah,
And then we were like, yeah, but that sucks, because then it's like takes 4 hours to get a tea, or for them to get cigarettes or whatever. You know what I mean? It's like
mm-hmm.
there's no deli on the corner. So we were
Right,
looking at urban areas, and that place just fit the bill. It's a place that I love working, and the people were really enthusiastic about us coming there. So it mattered
mm-hmm.
that we were going to be there for a few weeks.
Yeah, right,
Um, it's also, the whole record needed to sort of stand apart. I mean, we were working in a genre that's like been lifeless for me for years and years and years, even though I came up in the heavy music scene. It's
right,
like, it's just so played out when something sounds like, just only Kempers and only the grid and only, what I mean? It sounds like
yeah,
programming with
totally,
like a distortion pedal, maybe in the mix, if not a model of it. There's
mm-hmm.
nothing wrong with those tools, but where those had taken the place of the sort of danger in rock for me. So we were like, okay, let's go to a city that's like, that can be intimidating to people. Let's make this like it's in a grittier neighborhood, but in a beautiful studio. And that those two things don't go hand in hand in New York anymore.
Yeah,
The big studios are in neighborhoods that you can drop $100 bill and somebody will tell you drop something.
right, right,
You know what I'm saying?
right,
And we went somewhere else with that. That was like, we had a security detail.
right,
And it was like that reflects in the way that these things were recorded and what the guys were seeing when they were writing and performing these basic tracks, was like, more of a spread as far as the people we were seeing on the way to the studio, the
totally,
conditions people live in, things like this. I mean, it really affected them
right,
and me. It always has, working there.
yeah.
And
I mean, even the
basically
subject
that
of the
that was the
song,
bottom line.
yeah. I mean, like this particular song, you might be able to draw inferences there. I mean, maybe it was written before or whatever, but
No,
that vibe,
you're
yeah,
absolutely spot on. You're
yeah,
spot on.
yeah. Brilliant move as a producer to kind of identify that in the artist and see like, okay, this is where their life is right now, and this is where we need to go artistically. How do I get them there from that point? That was very good foresight. That's pretty
It
awesome.
worked out. Well, it
Yeah.
worked out. I mean, and honestly, it was like, it's being in touch with where they were at as human beings. Honestly, I mean, it's something that I'll tell
Mm-hmm.
people that they're like, "How did you get into producing?" I was like, I cried when I was a kid. I mean, I realized that I got the chills when I heard a major third when I was 6 years old, and I recognized pretty quickly that I was a mutant when I looked around the classroom and nobody else had felt it that way, where it
Yeah.
like made the hairs stand up on the back of my neck. It's like, you're qualified if you feel things. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Like, you're as
Right.
qualified as anybody else. The rest is fucking industry metrics that'll make people gamble more money on you. But you're
Yeah.
qualified if you can stand up in a room full of dudes with tattoos and talk about feelings. You're qualified to produce. If
Yeah.
you're not, if you don't feel like you just have to dive right into the idiom and think you should be talking about Les Pauls and Harleys just because the guy's got an eagle tattoo on his neck, it's like, we're talking about conveying something And that record in particular, we talked a lot about what's the target, what's the paradigm that this enters into. And it was absolutely about reaching the sort of marginalized kid that like has one tattoo in their sophomore year of high school and everybody thinks is the weirdo, and having them hear this and go, maybe I'm not as alone as I thought I was. And we went somewhere that was an isolated musical market, and all of a sudden we were reaching people on a daily basis. So there was a humanity built into it, and that led to a lot of these gestures coming out.
Yeah.
For all of us, like prioritizing what was important about, like, what's the value in what we're doing at all. I mean, I'm not going to go off the deep end like Oprah vibes here, but it was really like questioning what the value is in any given production and why anyone would invest money in it. And what we wanted collectively was a chance to be somebody's favorite band, not just an also ran in a pack that has fucking Radiohead, Green Day, and Metallica in it. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And that requires stepping out of line a bit. So Absolutely. This was just the sort of physical extension of that concept for me.
That's amazing. So you guys just wrapped up another record that's out and doing very well right now. Did you do well, I guess we should tell people, for anybody who doesn't know, how's the new single's doing really well. You had some interesting stats on it.
Yeah, man. The song 16 came out and went to #1 Billboard Rock. And it was #1 for 3 weeks in a row. And it's the first time there's been a #1 rock song since 1988 or 89, since Don Henley. I don't remember the song, but since a Don Henley song that has no guitars in it. It's the first time there's a #1 rock song since the 80s with no guitars in it. And we were really deliberate about using synths that took the place of it and making sure that what makes rock was intact.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, and to me, it's almost annoying how far we swung the pendulum to the other side, meaning like if we thought that rock had lost its danger or its ability to connect with the marginalized kids, it's like we wanted to continue with that gesture and connect even without the same old idiomatic trappings of what rock means in this country.
Yeah.
And it worked. Speaking of stepping out of line a bit to try to compete in a market with like a bunch of heroes in it, it's like all of a sudden here we are above Green Day, above Radiohead, and above Metallica at the end of the year. You know what I'm saying? With a #1 song. And that was massive for us that we managed. Yeah. That means that we had connected.
Absolutely.
You know?
Yeah. Well, what was the process for this record? Did you guys do a similar thing? Did you do a Destination Studio thing, or?
It was all at my place. It was all at Studio G in Brooklyn. Yeah. And pretty much it was like there were some slightly more realized demos this time because they had a bit more time between these two records. And the primary songwriter in the band took a little more time to really think about what he wanted to say musically, and then started to work on the lyrics once we had some of the textures that were going to be on the record. He sort of ricochets off of that. So it's always this very energetic back and forth between the two of us. That's so diplomatic what I just said. It's an energetic back and forth.
Right.
You know, like when I'll advance a particular kind of sonic agenda on what he had written, and then he ricochets off of that and it gives him the next set of ideas.
Yeah.
And then we battle, and then things come from that. And and he's brilliant. He's brilliant at taking those textures and writing lyrics that makes it sound like we served it instead of that the lyrics then laid on top of it. It's like those things where you can't tell which came first, you know? So he chicken and eggs it really, really well.
Nice. Yeah. Awesome. That's cool. He's really aware of that. Okay, I'm getting yelled at to get some viewer questions in. All right, cool. Sorry, little light going off over here. Yeah. Okay, so one last thing before we do that. I want to point out that you play on these records as well, right?
Yeah.
You had some guitars on My Name Is Human, and what are some other things that you did on those?
It's all the like additional percussion and synths, the sub-synth stuff, like the simple things that it's like I'm always trying to be the viola, you know what I mean? Like I find some common tone middle line thing. I play the stuff that's dumber than anybody would ever play if you hired a musician to come in. Like I find some 2-note common tone thing and play the middle of it on guitar. and there's no, it would take me an hour to get some professional guitarist to chill the fuck out enough to just
Right.
play the one note that I want up the middle of the chord.
Right.
Things like this. So it's always with compositional intent,
Mm-hmm.
you know, that we wind up with these kind of middle lines, or adding physicality to the bass, or just adding kind of like a shaker thing to the hats in the verses, things like that.
Yeah.
But it's always like additional percussion, guitar, and synths are
Yeah.
what I played all over these guys' records.
Awesome. Yeah, and that's all over the entire record, like not just on this tune, on My Name Is
It's all
Iggy.
over
Yeah.
the entire record to varying degrees, but yeah, it's definitely like something on every track.
Yeah. Is that common for you?
Making it.
In most records
It's
that you
common for
produce,
me
or?
in rock. It's common for me in rock because of the fact that there's like it's harder to describe how to hide a synth part so it just sounds like an extension of the bass player's rig.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Or how, like when to let up and when to play legato and things like this. It's just been refined to be transparent rather than refined to like go, hey, look at me as a musician. It's like it's as supportive as it can possibly be, and no matter what sideman claims that they're doing that as a primary goal, they always have a voice in it. And I need something that's voiceless and yet sort of supplies exactly what I need for any given moment. And it's just gotten easier for me to just do it because I played a bunch of different instruments over the years.
Yeah.
And toured the guitarist and rock bands and all of this
Yeah.
stuff. It's just simpler for me to pick up the damn guitar and do it than spend an hour talking about a 3-minute song.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's that simple.
Right. Totally. Do you when you have the band live on the floor, are you involved at that stage at all? Like are you
Yeah, for sure.
on the floor with them? Yeah.
Oh yeah, for sure. But not so much in like a playing way, but it's where I'll shape things at that point. It's kind of like this. If I'm never gonna stand behind somebody and try to shove them into a dark cave of creativity, like into the unknown of what we're trying to accomplish. But
Yeah.
what I'll do is go out into the room with a flashlight and walk right into it, and magically they follow me in. So it's
Right.
like if I have an idea for the direction and I seem very excited, enthusiastic, and sure of this direction, it's like people usually go with you instead of forcing them to find a direction for the track.
Right.
You know, so I think it's an important semantic flip there, because people just dig in their heels when you're standing behind them, trying to shove them into doing something different.
Yeah.
I'll also use this phrase, which anybody who's producing, remember this if you're younger than me, is that we're going to look at everything and do it by design rather than by default. So I'll go in and analyze what's happening and then spit it back out at the drummer and be like, is that just because it hurts your arm to do that after 2 minutes that you're changing? You know, or is it because you really think there should be a change in the middle of verse 2? Because either way, you're wrong.
Right.
But we should talk about it. We should talk about it and figure out why it's whether it's by design or whether it's by default, just because you got bored and did a fill or did a crash there for whatever.
Maybe they weren't even aware.
I'll look at that. I'll look at that quite a bit, and I'll watch the physicality of how they're delivering it and extract information from that. Like, that dude's just getting bored. I can see it in his face.
Yeah.
Or there's a guitarist who's like pushing into the strings harder. That lets me know that that's where the synth should kick in, because it gives me kind of a topographical map of what the intention is of the song. Like,
Right.
this is where they see it getting bigger, and right now it's not really getting bigger. It's just getting noisier because there's more cymbals and more shit happening, but it's not really getting bigger. So I need to figure out what does bigger mean in that moment, and that comes from me watching them physically. So I'll be in it like I'm a part of the band, but I'm not playing anything in that moment. I'm just watching them.
Yeah.
Like a creep.
Yeah, like a creep from the other room.
Yeah.
Through a window.
Yeah.
Just slowly peering in.
Or in it with them, but still like a creep.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you when they're cutting, do you ever, go in, just have headphones on, be in the room with the band and shape it that way?
Yeah, for like, what I'll do is when I'm going to tape, which I often am if I'm producing, we start on tape. And I have Pro Tools in line when we're doing that. Just the DLs are looped through like an 827. Like, we'll have the 827 in here just looped through the Pro Tools rig. And I use it kind of like a digital back if anybody's a photographer, and you just use it on a large format camera. Instead of blowing off a bunch of frames of film that cost money, it's like I'll just keep taking these rehearsal takes for an hour until I'll finally be able to say, that's the shape of it. And we just need execution takes now, rather than that we're still looking for what it does. we've found what it does and we just need you to get the execution of those gestures, that's when I'll start spinning reels and hopefully capture what we've figured out is the shape of the track, you know?
Sure.
And I'll do that to tape at that point. So that's
Awesome.
when I'll be out there, is when the digital back, like when Pro Tools is just rolling the whole time.
Yeah.
And I'm just catching like any ideas along the way.
Right.
And we have that to review if I ask the band to come in and listen, so I can actually talk to them rather than like yelling over the damn cymbals, you know?
Yeah. Right. Okay.
All right, before we get killed here, what's some questions?
We better do
the
it.
user
My next one,
man,
I was gonna drop a bomb and just say pre-production, go, but we'll come back.
Oh wow,
we'll come back.
All right,
okay.
All right. Pre-production ready?
All right.
Yeah,
Here's
pre-production or no?
Well, let's do it. Yeah, you're hot on it. Let's do it.
For me, pre-production has a lot to do with talking about what we're going to do and figuring out the goal for what it's supposed to do, way more than like how many fills are in the song. That happens for me on the day of tracking. Like pre-production in the traditional sense for me happens with like 3 takes before I actually start spinning the reels. Whereas we have rehearsals that are more about figuring out what the track is supposed to do.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? Like, meaning,
right.
What's the shape of this thing? How's it? What's it supposed to do? Is this the single? Do you see it as like the most exciting one on there? Is it the most personal track? Like, how much about what you're going to be throwing at me matters to you in the sense that you're dug in on an aesthetic position here, and that way I know how much I can keep running in and out of the room and sort of going like, that should be this, or this could be delivered in a way, you know, it's the same lines, like the director saying, this is what you should be thinking about to get the physicality of your face right when you say the same 4 words. You know, when the lady finally admits that she's in love with somebody else, it's like if she's going, ha ha ha, it's the wrong gesture. Right. And I can be the mirror to that and go in and say, you're going, ha ha ha, when you do that fill, and it doesn't really weigh on me. It seems like a joke in the middle of the verse. So pre-production is about sort of, again, getting the physicality of what they're going to deliver correct.
Yeah.
And it sounds esoteric until you're actually in the room with a band and you start looking at it in these terms. You know, if you admit, if we can acknowledge that there is a physicality to the delivery of live instruments, it's like, let's get that physicality right. And all of a sudden it flatters any mic choice. The best mic I've ever put up is the one that's in front of the person when they finally figure that out.
Yes. Another quote like that is the best piece of gear is a good song.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a good,
completely.
That's a fun one. Yeah,
completely. That's
cool.
Really.
All right, live questions. Let's do it.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you use hybrid or all in the box? So you are obviously, there's a lot of stuff behind you. You have
totally hybrid. Totally hybrid with no theological attachment to either device. It's like I like de-essers that are in the box.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. It's like I'll do it before it even comes out to the console. A lot of what I use plugins for are it's like a really smart tape machine that can kind of influence what comes off the track and lands on my console. So there's times where I'll do corrective stuff just to get it out of the box sounding the way I had hoped it was tracked in the first place, even if it requires some like notchy crap or this or that. I'll wind up making it sound the way I wished it was tracked and then have it show up at the console kind of like that never happened. I'll sort of like in my brain, I'll pretend that never happened. And now I'm just mixing a better kick, you know, in the analog domain. But I'm using, you know, an Oxford EQ for what it's good for, a Fab filter for what it's good for. And then using the console EQ on the SSL to be sort of the final influence on how it's presented or patching something outboard.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, great.
Definitely hybrid.
Cool. Here's a question from Space Prodigy, who is a really awesome electronic artist. She asks, what are your favorite synthesizers and what preamps do you like to use for synths?
Wow. I mean, my favorite synths are fairly obscure. I have a couple of EML 101s, the Electrocomp 101s. I have in the rack, I actually have like an entire modular setup that I use all the time, but that's like old fractional rack stuff that I've had since the late 90s. Like it's not even Euro rack. And then a small bit of Euro rack at the bottom there. But my favorite stuff is the stuff that is so annoying, and I'm answering this as a producer. It's stuff that hides in the track or makes a statement or has a particular texture that stands out. I mean, I have a mini Moog, like that works often. But I also have a Yamaha CS10 and a CS15 that kind of hides as the subsynth. On the My Name Is Human stuff, it was definitely the Yamaha, the CS10 I think I used. Nice. And it's just simple and has like a really kind of like, it just hides inside of rock elements better than a Moog does. A Moog sounds like a Moog next to the guitars, and the Yamaha sounds like the strings on the bass got bigger in the chorus. You know what I mean? So it's really mission specific. I'll love a particular synth or not. Now, as far as pre's go, I wind up being lazy half the time and using whatever the hell is a DI on the front of it. Yeah. And so it's like I wind up using these like BAE 1084s quite a bit. I use these Camilo Silva things here, which I made in Colombia, because they have 1/4-inch ends. I mean, it's that simple. So if I have a synth right here behind me and I'm like playing the sub-synth thing, it's like it's just plugged into those. If there's somebody playing out in the live room, I have these weird custom DIs that I love. They're like some RCA transformers from the 50s that my tech made because I'm spoiled, and I'll use that through what you would expect, like pair of 1073s or whatever. Yeah. Some sort of discrete thingamajig with transformers. That's more important. I like transformers when there's synths involved. I can narrow it down to that. Gotcha. So whatever you have access to with some transformers in it, I'd rather hit the crap out of that with a synth than just go in and like clip the hell out of my SSL pre's or whatever, you know?
Right. It's going to add a little heft to it. Let's do one of the pre-submitted ones. This is a really good question. Hold on 1 second here. Let's see. This is from, I love the username. This is from take_01.wave from London. And he asks, "Hi Joel, thanks for the awesome video and for giving such valuable insight into your techniques. I love the open, defined, energetic feel of the Boy Who Died Wolf album. I've had it on repeat ever since mixing My Name Is Human for the contest. Could you talk a little bit about your mixing philosophy? What do you aim for when you're mixing? What is the bigger picture influence the individual moves that you make on the console and your outboard? Thanks again." I guess we've kind of already hit on a lot of that stuff, but do you have anything you want to add to it?
I mean, just that if it's more in general terms and not just about My Name Is Human, I mean, it's for me, when I sit down in front of a group of elements, the goal in any case, like no matter what I'm sitting in front of, is to engage with people in a way that doesn't take individual elements too seriously, in the sense that I'm never going to solo a snare drum for 20 minutes ever. Yeah. I'm hardly going to solo a snare drum at all. And I'm going to sit in front of this thing and hope that I'm connecting in a significant way. Like, to me, engineering is fucking small talk. It's like if the musician looks to extract what they can from their instrument and the producer is extracting what we can from the musician, then the mix engineer is extracting what we can from all of that hard work. And what's actually of value in that extraction process is what's being expressed rather than how it's being expressed. So it's like separating. There's an entire book called The Information, which is about separating the delivery from what's actually contained. And it's a great book for mix engineers because you start to go, okay, at a certain point, it sounds quaint and silly for us to say that the king's decree was actually the fucking piece of paper. So they put it in a locked box and guard it when they moved the decree through the lands so that no bandits could get the decree. It sounds hilarious to us at this point because we know that the sort of what was decreed is the important part and not the piece of paper that it was written on. And so, I mean, to me, that's absolutely part and parcel with what we're doing. Like, the delivery of that gesture has nothing to do with it for me. And I don't just mean it's not the gear, man. I mean, it's like, I'll do weird shit in quotes. Like, wow, I can't believe you left that loud, or made this super quiet, or this is panned, or that's happening. There's balance in it because it requires balance to sound, quote, professional. But balance only comes from developing a contextual set of expectations for the listener, and then either deliberately supplying the expected outcome or deliberately removing that to juxtapose something. It's
Yeah.
like we set up an expectation and then deliver on it and it feels very settled, or we set up an expectation and we super remove that for a little while and it feels like up in the air, and then we deliver it again and it feels very settled when we get to the chorus. And that can happen as far as with amplitude, with timbre, with motion, with panning, with all the tools that we have available to us. But those tools have nothing to do with the delivery. They're just there to sort of exalt it.
Right.
You know what I mean? Just like the priest is not God. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
You're just there to hold it up where everybody can see it.
Right. Right. Great. Awesome. All right, let's do another pre-submitted one here. This one comes from Sheila from UAE, and this is a great question. I love this one. What was the first record you mixed that you fell in love with?
Wow. Okay, I have to change it a little bit to start, and then I'll get to it. The first record I ever worked on at all that I fell in love with was called "It's a Wonderful Life" by Sparklehorse, and I loved the person who's now no longer with us. I loved his look on life. I loved his spirit of adventure in the studio, and that led me to working on things and trying to spin that exact feeling into any aspect of it, whether it was tracking or mixing or the sort of exploration of how to connect with other human beings. And the fact that he's no longer with us made it all the more poignant that it's like that connection was the goal. And I think that the first one that I ever worked on as the mix engineer, though, like that was in 2000, we tracked that. It came out in 2001. So that's now 19, 20 years ago that came out. Since then, maybe the first thing that I ever mixed, though, specifically that I fell in love with. It is a great question. It's just hard because I can't even remember like what I had for lunch 2 days ago. So it's not hard. It's not hard because the sentiment is not there. Your question is brilliant. I don't know. I'm not sure. I'll have that in the back burner while we answer some of the other things, because I'm gonna have to think about that.
There's a variation of that question that we've kind of asked before, and that was how long did it take for you to make records that you were proud of from starting? That's
a great question.
Yeah.
I mean, a lifetime. I'm still doing it. Really. I mean, it's not just in a corny cop-out sort of pseudo spiritual way. It's like because I knew I wanted to do this shit when I was 4.
Yeah.
And so it was like, messing with things in the basement up through sitting in a studio that's now I have the second largest studio in New York, basically, at this point. And I started with like 4 tracks in a smelly basement. And that's amazing to me because I never inherited anything and I never won the lottery or anything. Like everything that you see behind me is like a testament to sticking with it because it was all bought with music money. Whether it was me going out, I mean, the last 2 tours I did were with Neil Young and Willie Nelson, like sort of as a support act and blah, 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 and all of this. And it's like that's because I love what I do. It's not, you know what I'm saying? Like, all of this shit became a testament to that rather than a business model. I'm the farthest thing from making smart business moves. I'm in the recording business.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean? Like, what the hell, man? Like, I should have invested in Apple stock in 2000 is what I should have done.
Yeah.
But basically it's like I really think that the answer to that is that it takes forever, but I was given the opportunity to work with people that I really admired starting in like 2005, 2004, like around that time, rather than just sort of peers. It's like finally I was working with people that I was really, really looking up to, aside from that Sparklehorse record, where there's like PJ Harvey and Tom Waits on it, and I'm tracking like Nina Pearson recording vocals with Mark Linkous and all of this. I mean, it's just a gorgeous record. It's called "It's a Wonderful Life."
Yeah.
And that was all on tape, like transferring from DA-88s that the primary songwriter had used in his little shed studio that he had down in Virginia, and bringing them up to Brooklyn and working with me on this stuff. And I think that record, if we're going to get deep about this, that record taught me how to love a record. And then from there, I was sort of in pursuit of that ever since, like I understood how loving it was allowing it to breathe instead of like headlocking it or feeling like I was doing it more, like that I had to masquerade as caring more because I fucking edited the piss out of every single drum hit, because that can masquerade as caring more, like that I don't care because I
Right.
haven't like quantized the shit out of everything and gotten rid of every breath or, you know, or
Yeah.
whatever it is. It taught me what to love about music in a way that was very significant. And then I've been sort of in pursuit of that same humanity ever since, and how that connected with people that still email me from all over the world about like what I used for that vocal and things like this, you know.
Yeah.
And that's from a record from 20 years ago.
Right. Right. That's amazing.
So
Great
oblique
story.
answer, but it's a great question and it inspired a nice thought, so thanks.
Yeah. Yeah. And gave us a record to go listen to go check out,
Yeah, yeah,
you
there you
know,
go.
around that story.
Dave
Um,
Friedman mixed that with the primary artist,
mm,
and but I tracked it.
yeah. Awesome. Um, let's see here. So we'll do another pre-submitted question. This one comes from Huron Valerio in Mexico. What would you recommend to train our ears? So, topic of ear
This is
training.
something that I always suggest for people. Listen to things that have done relatively well, or listen to obscure recordings and stuff, and listen to them like you're responsible for them. Because
Mm,
if you listen to Beat It and you're like, I don't know if I would have left the vocal that quiet, you probably need to reevaluate your aesthetic position, because it did really fucking well.
yeah.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like for some reason that one kind of connected. That whole Thriller thing did
Yeah.
okay for those guys. And
A
it's
little
kind of
bit.
like, if you're listening to it like you were responsible for it, would you have left, like including all the
Mm,
sort of psychic energy of walking into a room with an artist that huge and leaving the vocal that quiet? Would you have done that? Like, would you have been able to go, that's the right level, rather than just fucking blasting it? Because you're like, it's Michael Jackson. That's what everybody's here to experience.
yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, and so even sort of being able to look at the reasons why you would have done it differently and address them in yourself, rather than just that the mix itself is like something you would have done differently or not. Because
Yeah.
for me, that answers so many questions about your sort of instincts when you sit down in front of a series of tracks. Like, that's just, you'll go straight to what's important about something if you're like, I get what makes this tick. And it's not about whether you would change anything, because of course I would do it differently too. But it's like, why would you have cranked the vocal more and Beat It? Or would you have left that much high end on Eddie Van Halen's guitar? Or would you have done this, that, or the other thing? It's
Yeah.
like, and maybe it would have done fine in spite of those decisions, or it would have done better or worse or whatever. It's hard to imagine better at this point, but you know, it would have been the same song and all of this shit. If there's like another dB of 4K, it wouldn't have ruined Beat It. But at the
Right.
same time, it's like just listening to it and trying to figure out why you feel compelled to make that determination. And it's either like, it's all the things that you can then argue about on Gear Sluts, whether it's your room treatment or your brain or what you care about in life. But at least it requires analyzing it and looking into why you would make decisions when presented with a series of tracks that you are then responsible for.
Yeah. Yeah. That's an amazing answer to what do you recommend for ear training? That's great. Awesome. Okay, here's one from the live chat room. This is from Menez Naza. Hi, Joel. I would like you to recommend books where we can learn concepts, musical theory that prepares us, and let's keep up with the updates.
Okay, here's two books. Ready? One is called 101 Things I Learned in Architecture School, and the other one is called The Information, which I just referenced. And I forget the authors, but I know those are the titles. And both of them are directly applicable to what we do. You read that 101 Things I Learned in Architecture School, and you can't believe that it's not about music. You can't believe it. You can't believe it's not about mixing, because everything is about asymmetrical balance in a composition. It's about how you engage in a particular space. It's about the way people think about things, like why the atrium is smaller and then you move into a larger space in a church to give a sense of grandeur. So the entryway, the ceiling has to be much lower, and then you open up into a particular space. It's like the way we engage with spaces is absolutely applicable to the journey of like intro to verse 1, verse 2, I mean into the chorus, and then back to verse 2, but giving verse 2 a reason to feel like we haven't just driven around the block and come back to the same front door.
Right.
You know, give the listener a reason to sort of engage in it again.
Yeah.
It's like, that's why some of these tired ass tropes like V2 development occur, because you always need it to happen. The same way that the atrium in a church is always going to be a lower ceiling than when you walk into the main vaulted area, to instill a sense of awe in the person experiencing the building. You know what I mean?
Context. Yeah.
So there you go. There you go. There's 2 books. One's about
That's great.
architecture and one's about information and how we absorb it.
Nice. Very good ones. Okay. Let's see. Let's go with. Oh yeah, this one. I think there was a similar one to this pre-submitted too. So we'll just hit it here. This is from V Spell. How do you manage keeping a mix sounding full and rich and not thin and flat without muddying it up in the mids? So, how do you handle the low mids, I guess?
Well, I mean, it's where all the fundamentals cross. So it's sort of inherently active. You know, I mean, we just have to sort of accept that there's going to be some sort of notching occurring there because things load up there for sure. I find that I wind up with a sort of low mid intensive mix almost invariably. Like, it's something that I've gravitated towards since I was a kid, that I'll mic for the fundamental rather than a bunch of overtones in like a heavy guitar thing like this song. I'll wind up with a single mic on a cabinet because I just never really enjoyed trying to get a bunch of phase relationships to happen. So I'll do one mic per cabinet or one mic per amp, even if I have a multiple amp situation. And what I wind up with for me is sort of the availability of more fundamental than overtone, because there's just a focus to a single mic on a single speaker. When I'm doing that, I know that I'm loading up a crap ton of information that I'm then going to have to sort of deal with later, is the point of referencing the tracking. I think deal with is an interesting way to put it. It's like it puts it automatically in kind of a negative light. There's a negative connotation to that it needs to be dealt with. It's the way I deal with it is prioritize what I think is important in that range. When you listen to like a Queens of the Stone Age song where there's a shit ton of low mids and it works brilliantly, it's because that's what was prioritized in the guitars, and there's none of it in the drums. The drums are clacky and dead, and you know what I mean? Like deliberately working in a particular way to allow for all that information to occur in the low mids. So I deal with it by prioritizing what needs to actually speak in that range. Sometimes it's the chest of a baritone singer. Sometimes it's the low end of like heavy guitars. Sometimes it's the toms. When it's all happening at once, you just sort of figure out let's get rid of this sort of cubby hole idea in mixing, that it's like this happens here and this happens here and this happens here. What about in the break where there's all toms? What's the frequency response of the break? You know, like, so these like compartmentalization ideas to me have always failed in the face of the fact that a song is an evolving thing. It's not a static measurement of treble to bass. And so I wind up with sort of, you know, compressors interacting either in parallel or serial chains on the technical side, to where the gesture, meaning like in the parallel bus that has floor toms and a little bit of the bass drive in it, let's say, one knocks the other out of the way depending on who's making the strongest statement at any given moment in the arrangement. So if the bass stops playing for a second and there's a big fill, 100% floor tom goes to the mix bus through a parallel return and through all the further processing. So in that moment, it's 100% floor tom. You know, it's not a percentage where I needed to like scoop the bass at 150 to allow the floor tom to speak at 150. You know, it's not a static measurement like this. There's things that happen in time that are more important to me than just like cubby hole based stacking of sounds.
Right. And the frequency diagram where people are like, bass guitar lives here, whatever.
Yeah. I mean, it lives there until it stops playing and somebody does a fill, and then I'm going to use all available bandwidth to make those drums fucking huge. It's, to me, it's more, if anybody's nerdy enough to be into IT shit, it's more about like packeting. It's like sending things down the wire at any given moment that are active and need to be heard, rather than stacking them on top of each other like that. Like in time, it's like, okay, you go, now you go, now you go, because you need to do something important at the other end of this mix bus, at the other end of this wire. So it's more in the sense of packeting than stacking up frequencies, you know?
Right, right. Yeah,
If
that's a
that makes
pretty
sense to
good.
anybody who knows what packeting
Well,
means.
yeah, I mean, yeah, not unfortunately, but I do. So
Yeah,
it's
okay,
like
good.
it's a really
Yeah.
good analogy, actually. Um, cool. Okay, let's go with we
It's
had
like
a good
filling
one
up
about.
time slots. Sorry. It's like filling up time slots rather than filling up something that just is a static bookcase. It's like there's opportunities for
Mm,
1K at any given moment in an arrangement. There's opportunities for 80 hertz or 250 at any given moment. And so packeting would describe seizing the opportunity because there's like a seat on the bus for
yeah,
250 in that moment in the arrangement. So use it. Use the bandwidth available at the 2 mix to say what needs to be said at 250 in the moment in that arrangement.
yeah. That's a great
There
way
you
of
go.
thinking about it too, instead of like, just having your static tones that go throughout the song and not tweaking those to take
Not a
advantage of them.
pile. It's
Yeah,
not a fucking pile, man.
yeah, yeah. That's great. Uh, okay, we had a good one, another one from Space Prodigy about bass guitar. Let me see here. I saw it in there and it ran away from me. I believe that she asked. Oh, here we go. She's asking, what is your favorite preamp for bass? So while we're kind of on that low mid thing, maybe it'd be cool to talk about how you record bass. So here.
How I record bass in general or specific to My Name is Human?
Um, let's do both.
Okay. On My Name is Human, there were 3 channels, and it was a clean DI, and then a post pedals DI, and then there's 4, sorry, an amp, the main amp, and then a small amp. Like he uses, like the band was primarily a 3 piece
Yeah.
for the first couple records, and they were. So it was like something that was always missing in their sound that I sort of helped them develop, even for the live thing, was how to kind of bridge that exact low mid that we're talking about, where the sort of crowding in the 180, like the 100 to 350 zone, like having some crowding in that range, reading as thickness when you hit the chorus and you play unison, but then reading as sort of depth when the guys split and there's a high end melody being expressed on the guitar and low end from the bass. So it's like the small amp for the bass was just driving all the time, and then the pedals were switched, and all the combinations, the permutations that you would imagine. So in that case, I had 4 channels, which is rare for
Wow.
me.
Yeah.
Little amp, big amp, clean DI, dirty DI.
Do you have to do any tricks to just get the phase relationships to working with all of that, or?
Yeah, basically like ignore what I was getting from whatever's not working at a given time, meaning like
Mm,
I would just mute the little amp and then make sure that the phase relationships were spot on. I mean, phase is everything, so getting
yeah.
the phase relationships right, that's the same as like in a multi-mic setup for drums, there's always going to be relationships that are either flattering or not,
Right.
rather than that there is or isn't phase.
Right.
It's like there's a relationship there. And
Mm-hmm.
so, yeah, I mean, monkeying with it a little bit, but it wasn't crazy. It was just sort of, again, one mic on each cabinet, dead on the dust cap as a
Yeah.
starting point, and then pulling something sort of up or back an inch gave me a notch that I found flattering. It certainly
Right.
changes as you push up the other fader, but it changes for the better in this case. My
Right.
primary concern was making the DI work to both amps rather
Mm-hmm.
than that both amps would have to work together,
I see.
but they all wound up working together anyway. Um,
Right.
and in general, I usually have DI and mic of some sort, and I just monkey with it a little bit to get the phase right.
Mm-hmm.
Um, or kind of accept what I have right off the bat and like EQ around it on the way in, like kind of embrace what's being canceled. If there's a textural reason to keep it, and then kind of go, okay, the mids that are coming out, like the growliness of this with a B15 and a DI are just working for me. So the fact that there's some weirdness happening at the bottom, I'll just high pass the amp track. And in essence, there's only a DI at 80 hertz at that point, and I'm
Right.
taking the growly mids off the speaker, like prioritizing what I want from the given track.
Right.
I do that with kick mics often as well, where if I'm presented with something with some funny business in the phase relationship, I'll high pass the inside kick mic at 300 or whatever, like something crazy, and just use it for the snap. And then the outside kick is what I'm using for low end. And so in effect, what I'm wanting is like one mic at 60 hertz,
Yeah.
you know?
Right. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. And, I mean, it really, again, goes back to kind of intention during the tracking process of you're using those things to your advantage, and you know what you're chasing with the sound. So
Completely.
yeah, let's do a pre-recorded one or a pre-submitted one here. This is from J Merce Music from Texas. What are a few mistakes you see young or new mixers or producers make, and what would your solutions be for those mistakes?
Thinking about the drums out of context, thinking about the guitar out of context, thinking about the vocal out of context, like thinking about the sounds as the goal in and of itself, rather than the sounds as a goal for a greater communicated message. Thinking of, like, not taking into consideration the sort of idiomatic response that a particular texture can have. It's like if I held up a guitar that's shaped like a battle axe with dripping blood off of it, you'd have an idea of what sound that makes. And we can either go right towards that sound, or we can juxtapose it by having Mark Rebo play it in the video where he's playing something jazzy sounding or whatever. So we can either dive directly at that idiom, or we can go contrary to it in the two simple, oversimplified examples here. That's the same thing as choosing a particular device like a compressor that distorts a little, or choosing a particular thing that actually kind of encodes the track with information for the listener that they may or may not even be consciously aware of, where what you're saying is, this is about love, or this is about being angry, or this is about finding my way through life. It's like you can kind of put this stamp on each sound that actually reads as texturally important and carries the spirit of the track like that. Again, this is what I'm doing, is slicing something that we do naturally into such tiny pieces that it comes off like Yoda. But the point is just sort of taking the informed path to a sound that we would all recognize as good. Right. And why the fuck is it good? I'm trying to define that, and it requires these fine slices, because defining good for me, if you're an informed mixer and you don't just go, I don't know, I turn knobs until it's awesome. It's like, sometimes you can do that. Sometimes you can have sort of an instinctual response and just head right towards good for the song, because you get it so intrinsically, you get what's being said so intrinsically, because the gesture is simple, that you wind up with a sense of what you should pursue. But I feel like there's a lot of younger mix engineers that pursue some idealized notion of snare when it's pulled out of the rest of the information that's sitting right in front of you, meaning what the song's trying to say or do, or how it moves and what's being expressed.
Yeah. It, for some reason, that draws me to something else. I think it's kind of a crazy thing when, say you record a band, right, and then you go back and you're like, I just got this Blackbird or whatever sample pack, and I'm going to replace all my drums with those samples because those were recorded in that amazing studio, and that's going to be awesome drums or whatever. But it's completely out of the context of it. I hear a lot of mixes like that where it's that kind of stuff, and it's not. It really just kind of keeps coming back to that same theme of like intention and just chasing something, and having a vision of it, going after that, versus like, what's the best?
I have to yell down the hallway while you're talking really quick here.
Cool.
I'm yelling down the hallway. Francisco, can you grab him? Right. Cool. Hi.
Nice. Was that was a live room for your spot?
No, that was just into the hallway. The live room's behind me here.
Great.
The FSL.
Nice. Awesome.
Yeah, that was just into the hallway. There's 3 rooms on the upstairs here. There's A, B, and C, and I'm sitting in the A room here at Studio G.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, actually, that might be a fun thing to check on, or to talk about before we get out of here. Tell us a little bit more about Studio G in Brooklyn.
Okay. I mean, Studio G started as a one-room facility in 1993. And we've been going since 1993. We now have rooms A, B, C, D, E, and F is being built right now by Walter Storick. By Storick, I mean. And basically like it's going to be one of the biggest orchestral rooms available in New York City at this point to actually book, because Avatar is Berkeley and blah 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 and all the other
Yep.
stuff closed.
Mm-hmm.
And we've grown in part, in my opinion, because of a really strong community. Like both of my last two assistants have open studios. One is called The Bunker and one's called Strange Weather here in North Brooklyn. And I'm proud of the fact that both of those studios are doing well, and both of those guys like sort of were a part of the Studio G family for years and years.
Yeah.
But we created kind of more of a community-based situation where we would lend each other like the spare SSL supply if something went down. And we kind of took on the powers that be by creating a community. And the multiple rooms became an expression of like that we all needed somewhere to work, rather than the idea that we were going to build a gigantic space and then hope anybody shows up to record. It was like, it's kind of like when you had your first kid and then you wind up getting a 2-bedroom apartment once they get old enough to care about having their own room. Mm-hmm. And then we continued to expand to accommodate for more family members. And in that sense, I would say that the whole scene became like, it created gravity, like people knowing that they weren't just going to be sort of interns forever, that they were going to earn equity and wind up with a day to work in the C room or whatever on their own project. Mm-hmm. It's like it became just such a family affair, and everybody winds up investing themselves in it. It's like rather than startup money where you run out of runway and then you're just kind of done after 3 years of like having the best stuff in the world for 3 years and nobody wants to work there. Right. So basically since 93, we've been going at this point, which is insane to me. And, you know, at this point, there's a bunch of Grammy nominated things and Grammy winning things that happen out of here. And we've all been really lucky to sort of reinvest in the space. Like we all benefit from that as a community. Yeah. I would urge anybody to come through, if they're coming through New York, to get in touch with me really and come see the space, because it's here to serve a community. I mean, everywhere I've ever been in the world, which is significant at this point, where I've taught or worked or done sessions, you can really you learn to read the priorities of the community that a particular studio serves, because you see what's broken and what's fixed. And there's always something broken and there's always something that's doing great. And you see the sort of concerns of the community that it serves expressed in that. And so it's been really, really interesting to then apply that to my own space. Yeah. You know, and really kind of keep the things working that are cool and different about what we do and how we treat people. Like the fact that there's no disappointments laying around in the hallways. Right. You know what I mean? It's huge for me, where people are like, oh, an Optagon. You're like, yeah, I wouldn't use that. And you go, oh, cool, you guys have a 44. And it's like, oh, yeah, we shouldn't use that. Like that became just a heartbreak, a series of heartbreaks for me when I would go to studios. Yeah. That the gear list was really long, and then everything just kind of felt bad to ask for it until you work your way down to a 57. You know, starting at 47 and ending at 57 is a bummer because it's all broken, you know? Yeah. So anyway, it just, we're really proud of the fact that it's like, you actually can accomplish anything you want to accomplish here, you know, that I've ever found in any other studio, from working from the Village to Avatar to wherever it is, you know, like all over the place. And incorporating that in how we do things, but making it move like a band instead of like a business. Yeah. Like things are there quickly for you, you know, if you need a pedal or whatever. Yeah. So we're lucky, man. We're really, really lucky. I feel incredibly fortunate to have a place like this to work. Because I start to get annoyed that the, like, you know, bathroom hasn't been cleaned yet. And then I go work somewhere else and I start to really miss my home spot, you know?
Right. Yeah, definitely. Well, it seems
so come through if you're in New York.
Definitely. Yeah. That's great. So the whole almost 30 years, that's incredible. You're coming up on 30 years.
3 years. It'll be 30 years. Yeah.
That's fantastic. Very cool. And how much of you, I mean, everything has changed so much around you as well. I mean, the entire New York studio scene and all of that, like, I mean, that's a insane environment to survive in. Fab, you know, has Flux over, across the river from you, and like,
pick up
just,
Coco.
that whole studio scene is just incredibly hard to thrive and survive in 30 years. Congratulations. That's coming up on it.
Yeah, I can't believe it. I mean, the thing
Yeah,
is, this is like the real estate market has killed way more studios than Napster ever could have
yeah,
hoped to. You know what I'm
right.
saying? It's
Yeah,
like when people actually understand the nuts and bolts of what's going on, and you lose a 20-year lease. I mean, we're talking about
yeah,
some esoteric shit now, as far as off topic, but it's like
sure.
things end quickly when your rent quintuples. You
Yeah,
know, in a particular, like your business model fails in the face of that. So
yeah,
count your blessings if you have a good lease in a hot market, you know.
yeah, yeah, definitely.
And we do, and we're lucky.
Yeah. Well, on that that topic, do you have any advice for any studio managers out there, studio owners? A lot of our community does have rooms, and
Sure. For sure. I mean, make a space that, like, the way that every space I've seen that does well in this market, which is really difficult, is
mm,
a space that creates their own gravity. Like, there's a scene surrounding the bunker, there's a scene surrounding Studio G, there's a
yeah,
scene surrounding each space, the same way that Steve did over at the Magic Shop when that was still going,
yeah,
to the point where you had people like Dave Grohl stepping up to try to foot the bill to buy the space when
yeah,
when they got wind that it might close. I mean, that says a lot about the way the place was run. If somebody was willing to step in and bring some money to the table, that has
yeah,
nothing to do with like the Neve or booking it because they have a 47 or whatever. It's like that's dedication to a particular space. You know, it's kind of like how things become a classic to me is that the way people are treated when they walk through the door is like what they're doing matters to the
yeah,
world.
right,
And then from there, the gear is an extension of that. The same way if I took your picture with a phone versus pulling out a large format camera, you sort of sit up straighter and make sure that your
right,
shirt's better when I haul out like a real nice camera. It's the
yeah,
same idea. The gear becomes an extension of that, sort of rolling out the good stuff when somebody's about to sing. They feel
yeah,
like, wow, I've made it to a particular place where this matters, that I'm about to open my mouth and make a
right,
noise.
right,
Um,
mm,
that has always interested me. That simply being enthusiastic and respectful of what's happening within these walls has taken us so far, because it's absolutely at the core. There's zero business acumen occurring here. Again, it's back to the enthusiastic incompetence. It's like we'll run in the room all smiles, ready to rage on your behalf, and we may or may not have forgotten to pay the electric bill. But
right,
thankfully, there's a grace period there, you know. And now these days, all of a sudden, we have business managers that handle this sort of thing, so I can go back to being the like space shot that I am, and
yeah,
actually digging into what's important in this business.
right,
And I would say creating a we can't really create a massive difference in the industry because ultimately it's predicated on selling things. It's got to generate income, but we can create sort of an oasis for the artists where what they're doing in the moment feels really important, rather than like targeting all the time and trying to be so calculated. And you know what I'm saying? Like, it's a place
yeah,
where you feel like just actually creating the track is enough just for a second, you know?
mm-hmm,
and
yep,
and the nuts and bolts of how that happens, in my opinion, are just sort of allowing for the interns to know that they're going to bring water and put it in a decanter on a table next to the vocal mic, you know, with a couple of clean glasses before you start going in for vocals. And it's like it just happens by magic that when
right,
you're ready to go in there, it mattered enough. It's the mint on the pillow, you know what I'm saying? It doesn't
yeah,
actually
totally,
help you sleep. It doesn't help you sleep, but it let you know that they gave a shit when they made the bed, you
right,
know?
right, yep, yeah, and it
So
makes you more comfortable. It puts you in the space, all of those things.
totally,
Yeah,
totally.
yeah,
I mean, because you can.
creative.
It's funny because people will like fuck with the artist in so much in ways that are like psychological warfare, as far as like not making them comfortable, not
Yeah,
caring about anything that's important, but then turn on a fucking lava lamp and hope that they like get in the zone, you know.
right.
And it just is crazy talk to me. You know what I mean? Like, it's
Yeah,
just so. It's like the gift shop version of creating vibe, rather
right,
than just actually respecting the artist when they come through
right.
the door, which seems
Yeah,
pretty simple when you put it in those terms, but it's not always there, you know?
yeah. One other thing that I see happen a lot too is this happens with I think maybe private studios a little bit more, but you're still working with external clients. It just becomes about the engineer and about what they do instead of focusing on this person is here
Totally.
to create their art. and it's not about you,
Absolutely.
you know.
Absolutely. It's why we don't have a
Yeah,
bunch of art hanging up in the walls. It's sort of the Rick Rubin concept. Like what's happening here is you,
yeah,
and not, and not like 8 billion knickknacks and shit, like
yeah.
enough to make it feel homey and not sterile, but not so
Hmm.
much that you feel like your efforts are minimized by all the other crap going on here. I mean,
Yeah,
it's the fact that's what I'm the most proud of about this space is the fact that like Sesame Street has been making all their music in my studio in a room that I designed and built with my own two hands for years now, and yet we can have the most vibey, crazy thing happening in there. I can do like a lettuce record with everybody smoking 10 pounds of weed in there. And then the next day, it's like the most professional players and producers. It's the same producer as Hamilton and all of this
yeah,
doing the Sesame Street stuff on like Union scale can
yeah.
happen in that exact same room.
Right,
And so it's like that to me is what I'm most proud of, is that it's like creating a space where it can accommodate anything, big or small, without actually looking like a corporate meeting room. It doesn't
right.
look like it changes colors for anybody.
Yeah,
And it does impart a particular thing on the mood of the session, but it's not
hmm,
here to serve me. You know
right,
what I mean? It's just my
right.
crap laying around,
And it's not
like in the
constantly
racks.
reminding somebody that they're in your house, like, you know, like
Hell
that whole
no.
thing.
Hell
Yeah,
no. The
yeah,
farthest thing from that, but that's also an extension of the way we work. So it's
sure.
it's not about, it's never been about me. And I'm
Yeah,
also proud of the fact that if somebody looks at my entire catalog and goes, oh wow, you did the Black Rock thing with the Black Keys, but you also did this Tom Waits collaboration, but you also did Bonobo, or whatever, like stuff that
yeah,
none of those things sound anything like each other. You know what I mean?
right. Yeah, it's
So
very
it's not
diverse.
about
Yeah,
me. It's not about me.
right. Man, well, I want to let you get back to making music and
I'm gonna
doing all
do that.
that. Thank you so much for your time. On behalf of everybody at Puremix and the community and everything, thank you for your contributions. You've had
Thank
so
you
many
so
to our
much.
industry and everything, and thanks for taking the time to make a Puremix video and do this Q&A with us today and the contest and all of that. So very
Honestly,
appreciative.
I'm humbled to even be able to do it, because the company that I'm in on your site is like, I see myself and I just sort of giggle that I'm even next to any of these guys and girls. So it's amazing to be
Oh,
able to do it, and I appreciate it very much.
yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, before we go, I don't want to leave without saying something about it. You were involved with a series called The Art of Sound. Could you tell everybody about that real quick?
Yeah, I did. I hosted a series and did all the narration, like wrote all the narration and stuff, so it really connect with engineers, hopefully,
Mhm.
for Spotify and Bose, called The Art of Sound. You can find it on YouTube, and I think it's 6 parts. I think is what we did, but it's kind of like breaking down the constituent elements of why particular sounds engage people, and it's kind of like how records are made, but it's more of like what's important about music. It's got some art in it and it's got some tech in it, but it ultimately had to be for mass consumption. It's not a mix tutorial by any means, but I think that a lot of what's expressed in it is wholly applicable to an overall approach to making sounds.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great.
So it might be fun to check out.
Absolutely. Yeah. Cool. Where else can people find out more about you?
I don't know, the internet.
Cool. Yeah.
Have you seen that shit? The
Yeah.
internet's crazy.
I. That's the one. As Fab says, that's the one with email, right?
Yeah, yeah, the internet, the one with
Yeah.
email.
Yeah. Nice.
Amazing.
Cool. Yeah. We'll definitely keep
Thank
a
you so
works.
much, man.
Thank you. Cool. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for watching. Keep in mind if you do want to get feedback on your mixes from the contest, you could go over and post those on Mixtank on the site there, and somebody from Puremix or a community member will give you some feedback on that. Joel, thanks again. Our next mixing contest is
Thanks,
with
man.
Greg Wells, so
Amazing.
make sure you go sign up for that. We'll be doing another one of these Q&As with him next. So till then, thanks, Joel.
Awesome.
All right.
Thanks, man.